Okay, recording is live and we are ready to go.
Great. So today is July 1st. So today's working group call number 19. We'll start off with the weekly updates. So if folks want to chime in with sort of the things that they've been working on over the past week.
I can do a quick stand up. So for my stuff, I've been working through the repo a little bit, and I'm happy to say I got the GitHub pages turned on. So we've got a little bit going on there, both with GitHub pages, and we're using a plugin called Doxify to take all the content we have and spit it back out in a really pretty little format. So I will drop a link here for that. And otherwise, just going to keep heading down our agenda. I would love to close out as many action items as possible. So some of that I'm hoping to do today, and if not today, we can do throughout the week. And that's it for me.
Okay. And I see a few more folks have joined, so we're just doing stand-ups. Go ahead.
Good morning. Nice to see you, Jude. Well.
I can go. I'll give a quick one. Just stepped away. I incorporated edits to the blog that we worked on last week, so I would say that it's pretty much ready to go for publication. Brittany, I just wasn't sure how we wanted to do this on the Stacks.org website, so maybe that's something that we can just quickly decide on toward the end of the meeting. Also made some progress on community moderation in Discord with the bot that we discussed last week, and looking forward to sharing progress on that. Not much to share now other than the bot is being worked on, but I think that we will be able to test that out with a small group pretty soon in the next couple of weeks or so. So that's what I've been working on.
Thanks, Jenny. Other stand-ups?
Hi, first time in this group, but I just commented on issue number 1 on the repo. I have a draft of SIP 000 based on that Google Doc that we all shared. Also have a slide deck that goes with it. That just kind of gives like the high level TLDR that I'm happy to post as well.
Great, thanks, Jude. Any other stand-ups?
Just another week, a very active week, and so lack of time to do all what we want to do, but studying day by day. The governance issue is getting more important, so I'm a bit paranoid about it, and so I don't know. We have to keep on doing and advancing whatever we want. We can. Sorry. So I'm a bit worried about that, but studying, but not sufficiently what we are doing, what I'm doing.
Thanks, Philip. Yeah, there's a lot to get done, as you can see in the GitHub agenda, but I think there's a lot of progress, but yeah, always more things coming up. Any other stand-ups? Great, so I'm happy to, let me see if I can, well, I'll try and share my screen so everyone can see the GitHub that we are looking at. Let me get that set up. In the meantime, just my quick update on the foundation. So we did host our board meeting, so I'll be sharing minutes, publishing those, what happened in the board meeting. We're still waiting on some of the bylaw feedback from our legal team. So, I appreciate all the feedback on the GitHub issue about the bylaws, and I've actually, shared those with our legal team to get their input on how we could like resolve some of those issues by changing some of the language. So once I have a working draft of that, I will share that with this group here and also in the GitHub. That's an update for me. Okay, somebody's been having trouble with this screen share. So the next part of the agenda is around action items. So we have a number of action items listed out here. I can go through them one by one, but let me see if I can actually get this shared. Oh, okay, thanks. Much faster. Yeah, so the action items you can, thanks, Jason. So I'll talk about just like the Stocks Foundation. So this call for board nominations. Board nominations are still open. The process has not been formalized yet of how to sort of accept those nominations. So that's something to work on this week now that, in the board meeting last week, sort of talking about potentially adding new board members, and the board was on board for that. The Stocks bylaws, I kind of give the update there. I think once we have a better draft, including all the feedback, then we'll be able to present those to the community for feedback and then present them to the board to be voted in. Let's see, meeting roles, responsibilities, and bounties. I think, Jason, you've been working on this, but if others have been collaborating and want to give an update there.
Yeah, so what I'll do is I'll pull that one up real quick since I'm sharing the screen here. And I think we're pretty much all in agreement that we like this structure that we were thinking about. It basically sets up a moderator role who will kind of steward the entire call. You have a secretary role that has to do with the notes and updating some of the GitHub resources afterward. And then the updates, somebody to do the updates. And that was something that actually Juliet had offered to do as well. So we want to be able to publish an easy to read or easy to digest version of everything that we were doing it regularly in our little updates repo, but it fell off. And we just want to see what the best flow to get an easy result without requiring too much work would be. And then looking at the two roles of secretary and whoever would do the updates, it's something that we would like to look at as a potential bounty candidate in the future. I think it'd be fun to give people a little incentive to spend the time to do it consistently and come out the same every time. But to actually making any decisions around this, I think we're pretty close to just putting it in place for now. And there is a placeholder in each issue, or I'm sorry, each agenda issue that shows just who the moderator, who the secretary would be each week. And we could also name the updates person for something like that. But just want to see the best way to get this to start going. And then once we've got a regular process, we can definitely close out that issue. I'm curious if anybody has any comments or wants to add any more on that one.
Looks fine. And the treasurer, there's no need of treasurer, of course. It's just that the foundation will be dedicated to that, of course.
That is why I left that one out, but I'm open to talking about different roles that I think make sense from the community perspective. I think treasurer is more going to be handled by the board, and from there we can see what parts that we would be more involved with. And the other big thing about this is I really wanted to see it help keep our GitHub updated as much as possible. I think we have a really good flow going. And if we can continue that and to get more people involved, then it would be helpful. So I just trying to put a little structure to it.
Yeah, I think adding more folks to GitHub, yeah, I think we have a good process, and we're kind of figuring out the best way to make sure that we keep everything up to date. And so if you haven't joined the GitHub yet, definitely please request to join, and so that you can make updates and comment there as well. I think it's been working well. So it looks like our next.
It looks nice. I mean, it's because you already also considered the way to implement that and how to write it and where to put it, and if we have a video, how to process that video and also to publish that video and get all the. It's quite detailed, so it's very useful. I think that is a good way to put in practice. Well, you are putting into practice, yes. Yes.
Jason, I may have missed this during your update on this bit, but did we ever talk about having like a short training session, for lack of a better word, where you sort of go over these different roles and how the GitHub, I remember talking about it at a previous meeting, and just having like a short session where we go over how all this is done on GitHub so that folks could just be more familiar with it and sign up for different roles and rotate between everybody in the group to help out.
Actually, no, the last thing we talked about was that I'm definitely open to helping anybody walk through. I was due to reach out to Philip, which I actually still haven't done, to go over that standard operating procedure. But let me jump into this link that I have here really quick for the Doxify thing. So what I just did today is we talked about taking our resources that are there across all the repos and putting it into a website form that's a little easier to work with. And this is just the first draft, just turned it on kind of feel for it right here. But I think as we get this part finalized, which I will have up shortly, I mean, we're pretty much there, then I'd be happy to do some kind of walkthrough or workshop where we could say, hey, here's how you do this part, here's how you do that part. I just figure the standard operating procedures that we have are going to change slightly with how this works. So I wanted to get this piece done first. And ideally, I would love for this to live at resources.stacks.org, which is it's a minor change, but it's going to require some coordination between myself and Brittany or somebody who has access. So just some little things that I wanted to get done beforehand, but I am totally open to doing something like that, and I'll add it to my list as well.
Cool, thank you. And all this looks really great on the resources side.
Yeah, thank you, Jason, for putting this all together. It's really helpful.
Oh, it's been a community effort too. I mean, I've been trying to grab everything from Discord and these other outlets, and everybody has put a lot into this. So I want to turn it into something we can really use and put out there to represent us.
Very well done.
Next. Mm-hmm. The next item is around the survey, and I know that this is something that Lane has been taking a lead on, and he's unable to join this call, but I think he has his update here. Yeah, if you read it there, he factored in the latest feedback and posted a few more open questions to this doc as comments, which is still use some feedback. This is waiting for the blog post to be published for details of the town hall. We're going to sign up for this to be the call to the action at the end. Yeah, so I think you know, getting a town hall planned so that that can be the call to action. But if you have more feedback on his blog post, it looks like it's issue number 60.
Yeah, and I'll pull that one up real quick. I think the biggest thing we're waiting on is we wanted to do the blog post and then the email, so the email could look back at the blog post, and then talk a little about the town hall if we think we're ready to think about when to schedule that or do that. And I believe we were talking about doing that like once, was it once a quarter? I know it's a separate item.
Yeah, I think once a quarter, that's what Blockstack PBC does. Actually, Jenny hosted the town hall on Friday, which was great.
Yeah, I was
So
going
I
to say,
think,
we started doing them on a monthly cadence, but I am happy to take the lead on helping us plan that. Just obviously, it would require a little bit of discussion about how we'd want it to run and what our vision for it is. But yeah, happy to take the lead on coordinating it if that is an action item, or if I'm like being too premature here, let me know.
oh yeah, I
Not at
think it'd be great to get something scheduled and pick a date. Sorry, go ahead, Jason.
Same thing. I was going to say we have it down as a discussion item just because we hadn't decided on what we were going to do just yet. But I think with the idea of doing it quarterly, let's get the first one scheduled and do what we need to do in between.
Okay. Any other feedback on the survey or these tasks? Like I said, I think the update sort of covers, and if you want to go into any of the materials you talked about, those are in issue number 59 and number 60.
Well, actually, following up with the survey respondents, I think that at least we could invite them for this governance town hall. So that's maybe probably the first activity that we can do with them. And so then everything's put on the on that area, on that effort. So we don't have so many efforts, just one effort. So we'll put all that together. And also the results that we're going to be presented in the town hall, of course. So then all that we decide what to do with that information.
Yeah, so I think sounds like some of the discussion items like the town hall meeting, we'll pull that in with the survey. Because everyone's governance landing page, I don't know if there's an update on that.
Actually,
we gave your update, yeah.
the link I shared and what I just kind of showed off here on that resources tab. This is the start of it. So there's some room we can customize this and do a lot with it. The biggest advantage to what we're trying to do here is just by updating the resources in the GitHub. So specifically on the resources page of StacksGov there, it will automatically update the website. So that's the bigger goal, is that we can do the same management we've been doing and we can do everything else that we have here, but it gets printed pretty out to a new format that's a little bit easier for people to digest. So that's the one I'm working on, and we'll be able to close it out pretty soon. But for now, we can just say it's in progress.
And then the blog post, I think Jenny spoke to this in her stand-up, so I don't know if there's anything you want to add around the draft blog post. Okay, so I'll move on to the meeting conference software selection. So this was, we had some discussion in our Discord about choosing whether we want to continue to use Zoom going forward or switch to a different conference line. I don't think we found a perfect solution yet, so we may start trialing, but right now, Zoom does provide a lot of the easy infrastructure around recording and low friction to get on board. But I think if anyone has experience with any of these other video conferencing, please add comments to this or kind of weigh in if you've had really good or experiences that we should avoid it.
Yes, and I literally just added this comment right before the meeting, so I don't think anybody has seen this particular part yet. But a little while ago, I circled an article, and we were just saying, what are some open source alternatives that are out there? What is something we could get behind? And it's a harder question than I thought. So we've been looking at a few things, and these would be some of the contenders that I found both from that article and searching. I haven't done a full-on comparison of each yet, so I don't know if all of them would work, but I am really curious both about Apache Open Meetings, Jammy, which looks a lot like Jitsi, but has some really cool features and really backed by the GNU project. And then 8x8 Meetings Pro, I have that on the list. Since we didn't have very much luck with Jitsi in particular, I was curious if it's worth looking at the paid plan for their parent company, because we would be paying for Zoom anyway. Why not pay the company that stewards Jitsi? So those are some of the ideas I had that I threw in here. And my thought was to put this just to a little emoji vote in the channel or something so we can figure out one to try for next week. So I'm willing to take the lead on that today.
Last night I found another one we can test also. It's something like something, but they're coming up several new ones. But probably that's an evolving topic or emerging topic, whatever, because the people are looking for different options.
Awesome. If you can throw just a link to that one in the comments there, or if you could find it again, since it just starts with an I, then I would love to look at it next to the other ones. Definitely curious to see what we all find. And I agree, it's an expanding area, but there are different requirements, right? Like, is it going to require our own self-hosted server because that's going to be a technical requirement? Is it going to require the actual payments, or how does it do the recording? There's some questions that we really want to answer there, but I think at the same time it's worth looking, it's worth trying.
And then I think there's Harold shared some documents from FabAcademy and to row Wampum. And so I think he just was requesting feedback about those. I don't think he's on this call. He hasn't joined. And so if you get a chance to read through those, I think there's some really great content just thinking about governance and furthering our research. Now moving on to the open discussion, we have a number of sort of action items around these. So the town hall meeting, I think we've talked about that, creating, setting a date and then being able to work with Jenny on building out the infrastructure for that. And then I think using the time between to figure out the exact agenda on that, the types of things that we want to update the community on. I'm just going through here, the new GitHub labels for project management. So I think we discussed this in the last call, but Jason's been working to create tags, so it's very easy to see the things that are action items or where things need feedback. So if you go to the GitHub page, you can see those.
Yes, and actually I think we're ready to close out that issue, and I can go ahead and take that one off the agenda, but here's a quick overview of what some of those look like. And I know we talked about them last week as well, but just some quick ones to say, hey, these are meeting items. And then as we come into like resource or notes updates, I also just want to start encouraging like, hey, these are good first issues or help wanted or things like that. So just another organizational step. Oh, come on.
Great. So I see some of these, discussion topics are similar to some of the action items. So I just wanted to maybe create space if there's anything that people wanted to talk about specifically or get feedback on out of this list.
Sure. How do we feel about finalizing or closing the loop on this first blog, and could we talk about the process for publication and promotion as well?
Yeah, I think, I guess maybe where are you at with that? Are the edits done? Is it more about location? Because I think from the foundation side, we have a blog on the foundation website that we can utilize, but we may also decide that, you know, hosting on a decentralized application maybe is a good fit if it's going to be from the community. But I'm open to ideas on that in this group.
Yeah. So I've incorporated all edits, and if everyone's comfortable with where the blog is at, I think that it's pretty much ready to go. Maybe there are some final tweaks that folks want to make, but I don't think there's anything that is major there that can't be fixed in a couple of seconds. So I assume that this would go on the Stacks.org website, but and I hadn't thought about having it on a different application. So that's something that would be good to discuss here. Just because it's an intro blog, it can definitely be in a few places, but maybe having it on an official property would be a good idea.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I can work with you on publishing that in our on our Stacks website blog too.
Great. Okay. And yeah, so I can work with you directly, Brittany, on this, and I guess we can have it published by the end of the week. The other issue is that it is a short week with the holiday, and so I don't know how much attention this blog would get. I know we had originally planned to have it published yesterday, but it makes sense to talk about it, some of the details on the call today. I mean, it's ready to go, so we can publish it tomorrow if we wanted to. But I don't know if folks had strong feelings about maybe publishing it next week instead because of the holiday, or whether it doesn't really matter. My sense is that it would probably be fine tomorrow, actually, but wanted to put that out there.
I vote for sooner than later.
Great.
I agree. We will have Independence Day this month. It's in September, so we don't worry about that.
I'm not too worried about it this year either. I'm being honest. Okay, cool. So yeah, I'll just connect with Brittany on that, and we'll give an update on when it's going to go out in the Discord group tomorrow.
Any other topics that folks want to get feedback on or talk about here?
Just really quick question for you, Jude. On the SIP 000 proposal that you put out, did you want that to be a part of these repos? Did you imagine, or what do you think is the purpose of that Stacks.org repo versus the Stacks.gov repo?
So at some point, the code for the Stacks blockchain needs to migrate out of a organization controlled by PBC and into one controlled by the foundation. I'm not married to Stacks.org per se. I just went ahead and grabbed one, and then just went ahead and created a SIPs repo within that. I'm happy to put that in the Stacks.gov if that's what people want to do, though.
I think it's a small detail. I was just more curious what we were thinking in the beginning here. So we'll keep things as they are, and we'll move them or change them as we need to. I don't think there's an issue to do that right now. Just curious. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So did you, Brittany, do you speak about, you know, the being in the meeting, board meeting last week, or not? I missed that. Or
Yeah.
in the, yeah.
Yes, I'm happy to share the minutes. So I just have to type them up. Basically, we covered the, kind of the priorities for the foundation. So that's something that had shared in a forum post. We went over those with the board. We also talked about the grants program, and I kind of drafted what the grants program could look like. So that's another to do for me, is to share that out. I think it was largely a discussion, so just getting thoughts on paper to share with this group here. And then, just like the scale and the size of the grants program as our initial step, and then being able to grow it over time, especially as we can do our grants in stacks. Because right now, due to regulation, we can't issue any of those grants in SDX. We have to do it in an alternative, so like US dollars or Bitcoin. So we want to be able to transition the program from US dollars or Bitcoin into stacks with the launch of stacks 2.0. So just getting feedback on that. And then also with the board. So, asking the board about adding new members, proposed the idea of a community board seat, as well as these new board nominations. And they were comfortable with adding additional members to the board in that way. So those were kind of the three categories that we talked about. It was all very, very positive. They're very excited about what's been happening. We shared with them the work that's been happening in this group as well. So I think that was a positive thing. But with the board nominations, they, are accepting of us adding more, but now it's kind of like the process of, okay, how do we want to consider those new nominations? Is it, profiling the potential candidates, that is both people that have been nominated and people who are interested to the community, or is there, some other sort of process that, helps us recruit like the best people, but also gives the community a really, a voice in all of it.
And if I remember right from the issue too, we talked about you were going to confirm the nominations and then possibly share that list with the community is the next step, right?
Yes. So with that, I have the nominations. I think I'm happy, or, I'd be curious your feedback on just some people who were nominated don't know that they were nominated. So if those names should be shared, or maybe it's shared in a smaller group like this, but just thinking about how to be mindful that some people whose names are on there have no idea that that this is that their name would be on some list, versus those who have like actively been actively know that they're nominated.
And I think that makes sense to reach out to the people first, just to say like, hey, you're on the list and we're going to discuss the list on next week's call or something like that, just to give them an easy way to know they're out there instead of surprising them.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Awesome. And I'm sorry, I guess I had one more follow-up question to that. So how long were we planning to keep those nominations open, and when do you think we could present those names, like if we were to try and notify those people or anything else? Do we have a proposed timeline for that?
Yeah, I think now that we have the, sort of sign off from the board that we can add more people, I think that was, just wanted to clear that first. And then now that happened last week, we can actually look at the nomination. So yeah, I think sharing the list as of next week, like I said earlier on, I think this idea of rolling nominations, we can increase the board. I think there will be different members of the board. I think we can always have consideration of new people, and even if they aren't able to join maybe as a board member because of capacity, there may be opportunities for them to join, like we've kind of roughly said, oh, maybe there's technical committees that help weigh in on new SIPs, or an economic committee who's thinking a lot about treasury or monetary policy. People who we want to pull into our community, but maybe it isn't through the board seat, it's through different groups like that. So I think the idea of having rolling nominations can help feed into a lot of the like types of opportunities that will open up. But yeah, I think delivering on this first wave, providing the names next week after I check with the people who've been nominated, and then we can use next week's call to discuss that. So maybe we can make that an action item.
Awesome. I have that noted, and I'm happy to help with that.
Thank you, Brittany, for your briefing. Yeah.
So I think one other discussion item we could get a little into today that we've had on our list for a little while is this fireside chat series idea. And we were basically just proposing the idea of bringing in outside people to do a regular fireside chat, maybe discuss governance in context of what we're doing. I think it would be great to, as a follow-up to the blog and some of these start public efforts, now that we have the website live, we'll have the blog, we'll have some of the basics set up, and we'll be ready to start something like this. So I was just curious what anyone thought on this, or how we can make this a little more of an action item and start thinking about it.
I think that we have to do make the first move. I mean, it's decide which one is easier to do and not so complicated, and just do it. And then that will be a way to start. Whatever we do is good. I mean, it's well, of course, you know, it has to be aligned. But whatever we start doing it will be useful. No, as Jenny has done with this reading, you call it reading or listening, the video presentations of different people have done. Probably it's a good idea to start with something like that. Not a video, but probably an interview and a talk with somebody. Let's do it. Probably Juliet could help us there with the Primavera, and was one of the, you know, some that are more accessible. Also, this called economy of solidarity. That's another concept, and there's new things that are coming up, and probably they could help us to understand how ecosystem works and how we could develop that. And so that's a lot of new thinking, especially influenced by the pandemic that has gone back to the roots of what the human beings are. So that's something that we can take advantage of that, and it will be easier to invite in this case, in this situation.
Do we have any context from when this idea first came about for what we wanted to achieve with this? Not that everything has to be about being productive or it has to have a goal, but was this around like collective learning, like the reading group that Philip mentioned for the business models group, or what were we hoping to achieve with the fireside chat series?
I think the idea was just to generate some discussion around these ideas that we're putting forth and everything else with some of the leaders in some of these areas. And the fact you mentioned the reading series with the business model group, I was just thinking about that. You know, we're getting through each of these large topics, and I know Patrick does some excellent podcasts with some people as well. I wonder if we could look at maybe aligning those two a little bit if we had any topics on governance. And then we also just had that radical exchange event that we had posted a whole ton of videos from. So I think the idea was more to just associate our name and say, not only are we doing this effort and we're looking at everybody, but that we also want to reach out to some of those leaders in these areas and say, What would you give us advice on our project, or what do you think of what we're doing, or what can we learn from you in that sense? That was at least the feeling that I got from the original discussion.
Cool. Yeah. A podcast or podcast series, or I mean, the series in general sounds really, really great for that. Thanks for sharing context, Jason.
But it's related with business models, because actually is how we now, since I understand what more clearly how the ecosystems building, or how I say, infrastructure helps you to build this ecosystem, and well, at least is trying to do it. Then which are the principles and the basis of how it's going to work. And so in that sense, it's still time to establish that before it gets frozen or gets made of concrete, or as that is cannot be moved. So that's more or less the idea, the inspiration. So it has a kind of a business model influence, but not only that, is just how all this cooperation and reciprocity it should, how it works, and how all this ecosystem can benefit of all this interaction, and then it generates all the prosperity for everybody, and all people get benefit and incentives for everybody, or how that will deal, and etc. So and then, well, actually all that is a new way of doing it. So we are learning, everybody's learning actually.
May I say that the reading group, the working, the meetings from the business model working group are very successful, because we are first provided previous information of some information, and we discuss on something that we know we are going to discuss about. And I think that's what helps maybe people from the community who are not already engaged in some group to participate. And that's what I think is very interesting, could be very interesting also for governance. I mean, if we, these far chats are on, it would be nice to have the community being involved in a way that they could really participate and make the contact, not just listen. The podcast is a very good idea, but at the same time, it would be nice to have this kind of engagement or interaction or participation from the community.
Excellent. I noted some of that down just to say that it definitely went into my notes, and I think that's a really good point. The way we've been able to get people involved in the reading sessions there, it's taken I mean, it seems like people really enjoy it, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So if we could do something similar, it's an interesting thing to consider, and I definitely have it noted down. I like it.
Mm.
Good. Even open any other comments or topics that you want to discuss here? I think we have about 9 minutes left.
I had a slide deck I could share really quick if y'all would find it interesting about the proposal for SIP 000.
Sure, let's check it out.
Sure, let me just get it up here.
Excellent.
Let's see, share screen. Here we go. Cool, can you all see it?
Yes, that's a very important question to ask us, especially at the beginning of the meeting. I had an issue last week on that.
I think there might be like a little black bar at the top, but other than that, everything looks clear.
Yeah, it's all right.
All right, cool. So one thing I've been doing just in the background has been working with the Google Doc that Lane shared a while back on notes on governance proposals and trying to spin that into a formal SIP draft, which in turn will serve as the basis for how to produce more SIPs, as well as to formalize the committees and individuals responsible for the ratification process. And I just wanted to briefly go through it here with this short little slide deck. There's three parts of this. The first of which is just the draft definition of what the process is. The second part is the activation and life cycle for individual SIPs. And the third part is the relevant committees responsible for ushering a SIP through its life cycle and the responsibilities that they have. And the caveat up front is all of this is subject to change. Its draft status, comments and feedback are highly encouraged. It's based on both feedback from this working group from the previous minutes, as well as from how other successful open source projects, not all of which are blockchains, have managed to govern themselves. So why formalize this? Why have a SIP at all? Blockchains are unique among distributed systems in that upgrades, system-wide upgrades can be potentially very contentious. And that's because a blockchain is more than just a piece of software. It's also its people. It's also the people who use it. And if you want your upgrade to go smoothly, it has to happen with the consent of its people. So a formalized SIP process helps there be an agreed upon way to propose and discuss system-wide upgrades, as well as an agreed upon way to execute them. Critical to this are ways to measure consent, like to what extent the community wants the upgrade to happen, as well as to resolve conflicts that may arise. And it's important that we have a formal process for this so that everybody knows what they can do to help, and so that decisions that get made, as well as the people making those decisions, are held accountable and made in public. And crucially, the process is designed to be as inclusive as possible of all of its stack's users. And that's again because blockchains succeed because of their people. And not all users are developers, and not all developers are core developers. So it's important to give everyone a seat in the process. The goals of the process, first and foremost, if we want to make any large-scale changes to the blockchain, we would want it to be reviewed by the relevant domain experts before getting applied. So that way we don't have, like, for example, a freewheeling SIP that tries to make 1 billion stacks out of nowhere or something crazy like that. In addition, we want there to be a way by which discussions on upgrades, as well as feedback from said experts, is public and discoverable so that we all learn and benefit from the process. And the curation process, the process is fundamentally curative. We want it to be the case that the SIPs are all held in one place and that the SIPs collectively give a well-defined and unambiguous definition of what the Stacks blockchain is and what it's supposed to do, as well as how it's supposed to operate and how changes get to that process can be applied. That said, the process is also open. Anyone can submit a SIP and anyone can participate in the governance by helping to edit, review, and activate the SIPs. So that said, in the proposed process, all SIPs have the following types of properties. All SIPs will have a type, and by type, I just mean we need to know how the SIP is proposing to affect the Stacks ecosystem. There will be initial candidates for the types of SIPs. Those would be the consensus SIPs, standard track technical SIPs, operation SIPs, meta SIPs, which govern the SIP process itself, and informational SIPs, which simply provide helpful information or supplementary material. In addition, I think that SIPs should each have one or more considerations formally listed out in them. And all the consideration tells us is who should weigh in on this SIP. For example, the initial candidates I have written in the proposal are a technical consideration, an economic consideration, a governance consideration, an ethics consideration, and a diversity consideration. And individuals as part of the SIP ratification process who list themselves as experts or having strong and well thought out opinions on different considerations will have a way to voice them and have their feedback incorporated into the SIP. In addition, each SIP has a status, and that's simply where it is in its life cycle. Like, is it a draft? Is it under consideration? Is it going to be ratified, etc.? And I have a flow chart and a few slides that describes that. And finally, each SIP has an activation section. So one thing that is important for the SIP authorship process, as well as the process for proposing it, is to describe how you know whether or not it's activated. So the steps and criteria to determine if the Stacks community is okay with the SIP going forward. And this process, by the way, is not rigid. It's meant to be extensible. Through the considerations here, you can create a meta-style SIP with, a meta-type SIP with a governance consideration to change any of the above here, with an appropriate activation section that is equitable, that gives everybody a chance to provide feedback on it. So to make all of this work, I'm proposing that I'm pretty sure this is all old hat. I'm pretty sure this is all in the Google Doc. I'm proposing there be 3 types of committees responsible for curating the SIPs. So what would happen is a SIP author, somebody who has a cool idea and just wants to start the ball rolling on getting that idea incorporated into the greater Stacks blockchain and its ecosystem, would simply write up a SIP and submit it to a SIP editor for acceptance. Crucial to the authorship of the SIP is the inclusion of an equitable activation section. So like an example of this could be, there will be a vote on whether or not the SIP gets accepted, but an unacceptable version would be like, this SIP gets accepted no matter what, I'm the dictator. Like, that would not be okay. So the first body of individuals in the governance process would be the body of SIP editors. And all that they do is they make sure that the SIP that is inbound from authors are well-formed. They are novel, they don't repeat something that a previous SIP has done. And the editors work with the author to make the SIP ready for consideration. In addition, the editors work in the background asynchronously to try to grow their ranks, like to go find new SIP editors. And that's their governance responsibility, in addition to making sure that SIPs get into a form that's ready for review. Once a SIP is ready for review, one or more advisory boards, which are specific to each consideration this SIP has, so a technical advisory board or a governance advisory board or an economics advisory board, takes a look at all the accepted SIPs in a timely manner that the editors mark as accepted, and they can move that SIP to recommended status. So they use their expertise to provide a public recommendation for or against a particular SIP, and that in turn is taken under consideration by the next committee. So the steering committee sits at the end of this pipeline here from the advisory boards and the editors. And all the steering committee does is they pick a subset of recommended SIPs that can be activated, and they oversee the activation of that SIP per the activation section within that SIP. So the steering committee is not capricious or arbitrary in what it does. It's just following the procedure in the activation section of the SIP to make sure that there's sufficient buy-in from the community before it's considered to be part of the canonical set of SIPs. In addition, the steering committee has a governance responsibility of recognizing working groups, so informal groups of users who get together and publish advice or submit opinions on SIPs, recognizing them into formal advisory boards so that they can have their own consideration for future SIPs acceptance. And finally, paramount in all of this is the ecosystem itself. The affected parties of each SIP choose to or choose not to accept changes, and the way by which this happens is described in the activation section of the SIP. For example, a consensus SIP might have a on-chain voting activation section and a protocol that the ecosystem of miners and users would have to execute technically in order for the SIP to be ratified. But a governance SIP might just require a vote from the majority of members of the foundation, for example. In addition, the governance responsibility of ecosystem participants, if they aren't already in one of these committees, is to run for office. But the takeaway here is there's this inbound funnel from authors that just refine and rarefy SIPs to get them into higher and higher quality with more and more consideration. But ultimately, the set of users who make up the ecosystem decide which ones get activated and which ones do not. So that said, I mentioned that there's the status of each SIP, and this is the draft proposal for the SIP lifecycle here. Every SIP starts out as a draft, and then once a SIP editor signs off that this is a well-formed SIP, it gets accepted. And then an advisory board, depending on what considerations that SIP has, will sign off on it if it's appropriate and makes sense, it's technically sound, it's ethically sound, et cetera, moves the SIP to recommended status. once all SIPs considerations are recommended by the relevant advisory boards, the steering committee will sign off, and then the SIP transitions to activation in progress, at which point we just track the SIP based on its activation section to see that whether or not it goes through or not. And once the ecosystem participants move to activate, the SIP transitions to ratified status. At any point in here, SIP can be rejected for one reason or another. Maybe it's not up to snuff for acceptance, maybe it's technically unsound, something like that. At which point the author would just resubmit the SIP as a new draft, and we would just work with them to make sure that the SIP's well formed before it reaches activation. But once a SIP is activated, like once the activation process is kicked off, a SIP can either become obsolete, like let's say it doesn't get taken up, or it gets replaced by a better SIP that's competing with it, or it gets withdrawn by the author. But the key difference here for this part of the flow chart is that activation can only happen once. If the activation fails for whatever reason, then you have to start the process over and you get a new SIP number, and the previous SIP is simply marked as withdrawn. And the reason there is just to make sure that we make progress on this. Like you don't find SIPs spinning forever and ever in a loop where they never quite get activated, but they're constantly stuck in this process. And that's just to make sure to make sure that we move the process along and that the community doesn't get sidetracked by there being many concurrent SIPs to consider. That said, each of these committees is open membership and transparent. It's pretty straightforward to become a SIP editor. The proposal I have in the document is that we maintain an invite tree of editors. So an editor can invite another person to be an editor and sponsor them, make sure they understand the editor responsibilities. Then that person can go on to invite other people, etc. And to make sure that this is in good faith and that everyone's accountable here, we preserve the invite tree in GitHub so that if someone invites someone who's going to act maliciously or in bad faith, we can kick that person out and also kick the person out who invited them. And to become a member of an advisory board is pretty straightforward. All you would do is form a working group, which is just an informal gathering of people to voice opinions or to take under consideration SIPs for ratification. And these working groups can be formed at the drop of a hat. What the steering committee should do is they should invite working groups to submit SIPs to declare new considerations so that working group can then formally give advice and consent for SIPs that are under consideration. And then other SIP authors can explicitly ask for that group of people's review on a SIP. Like let's say there's a consideration for something like an ERC, like a particular format for a smart contract. There could at some point be a consideration track for ERC type smart contracts. And that ERC smart contract consideration would be reviewed by the individuals who initially submitted their desire to review SIPs of that nature. And this is just a way to help connect SIP authors with people who have domain expertise to review them. And finally, the steering committee. And this is easily the most open-ended section in the structure for me. And I see that there's still issues in the governance section as well. The initial proposal would be that we would just have 3 members, one from PVC, one from the foundation, one from the community, all subject to change. And of course, it's going to be very important that we do a good job of picking the community members to sit on the steering committee. I believe that there's a few ideas rattling around. I can write those out as well. And the SC should not be bound to just 3 individual people. This is just a way to get it off the ground. I could see their SC growing to have many individuals on board for different purposes, and there could even be offices within the SC depending on how big it gets. And this is kind of inspired, to me at least, by processes like how the FreeBSD project has their technical governance board, or how the Debian project has the software in the public interest and the president that helps run the process for the greater set of Debian contributors. But that said, thanks for your time. This document, the draft SIP 000, is linked on governance issue number 1. I just went ahead and registered StacksOrg as a GitHub organization, but as Jason mentioned earlier, we can move it over to StacksGov if y'all would feel that would be appropriate. But yeah, it's in GitHub and it's public, and I welcome any and all comments.
Thank you, Jude. I see some thumbs up from Jason too.
It is, yeah,
No,
very interesting.
I
It
mean,
looks
we're a
like it's
little over
less
time.
work now, huh? not less work, but more work, more work to do in the future. Yeah.
Well, what we're seeing here is the beginning, right? And what I love about that is starting to see some of these formal processes come together and say, like, this is the way we can actually start doing things. So it'll be interesting because in the beginning we do have to lay some groundwork, but I think once we get this moving, we have a process in place, it won't feel so cumbersome. So.
Yeah, we just got to get past the first little bit of friction. But then, like, you know, just like how we see other blockchain projects with lots and lots of BIPs or ERCs or EIPs or ZIPs under consideration, we hope to have similar.
Great. Well, I think we're just past time here, so thank you so much for that. But if you want to stick around, if there's additional questions, I know some people have to jump, but yeah, really appreciate you sharing all that. Okay.
Thanks for having me on.
All right, I'll see you guys all in Discord then.
Yes, excellent. Thank you very much. Good start for the SIP process.
I got to bounce too, but I'll see you all on Discord.
Bye.
Bye.
All right, thank you. And I didn't have anything else to add either, so I think we're good to go. Just next week's call will be on the 8th. So it'll be July 8th, same time, same place. Maybe with new software.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Nice seeing you, Jason. Keep the good work advancing.
Thank you. Yeah, and we'll talk more as we get into those procedures for sure.
All right, good, excellent. Saludos, Yelena.
Thank you. Igualmente.
How's your
Saludos.
Spanish?
Yeah.
How's your Spanish, Jason?